Right, you're watching TVC Breakfast. So, following organized labor's insistence on declaring a nationwide strike later in the month, if discussions on the new national minimum wage aren't concluded by May the 31st, the federal government has announced a meeting with the 37-member tripartite committee in a major effort to beat that deadline. Recall that organized labor under the platform of the Nigeria Labour Congress and its affiliates, that's the Trade Union Congress, had on May the 1st, in a joint address during the May Day celebration, warned that if negotiations on the national minimum wage aren't concluded by the end of May, the trade union or the labor movement in Nigeria will no longer guarantee industrial peace in the country. The president of the Nigeria Labour Congress, Joe Ajero, and his counterpart in the TUC, Festus Osifo, were unanimous that the current minimum wage isn't sufficient for Nigerian workers with the current economic realities in the country. The labor unions are insisting on their proposal of 615,000 naira as a new minimum wage, given May 31 as the deadline. All right, so let's talk about this now, how workable and what happens now. Joining us via Zoom from Ghana is the MD CEO of Exitum Consulting Limited. Adeyemi Ajayi is also a labor advisor. We thank you very much for joining us on TVC Breakfast. All right, so the latest is that these labor leaders have, they walked out on the meeting following a reported paltry offer by the federal government, and they are insisting that there is no going back on their own version of a new national minimum wage. So talks, well, as from what we see in the reports now, talks have broken down. But what do you think about the back and forth so far?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me this morning. Well, if you follow the pattern of negotiations between the government and the organized labor, you will discover that most times the organized labor feels so they feel so very bad from the way the government comes. And when you get to negotiation table, there are two things that normally happen. You have your best alternative, you have your worst alternatives. Your best alternative, maybe the other person's worst alternative in negotiation. However, there should be factors to be considered on both sides. One of the things Labour said is that offering 48,000 naira for government and 54,000 naira for the private sector does not make sense at all. And if I will have to, be objective about this, I think the labor is right asking for something better. Again, I want to say that maybe the labor is stretching too far, asking for 615, because as a matter of fact, I do not think that 615 is realistic. So I think both should come back to the table. I strongly believe they'll still come back to conversation. And again, the May 31st deadline does not seem realistic to me from the way things are going.
So if you think that what Labour is proposing is unrealistic and what the federal government is proposing is not okay, what do you think in between should be the minimum wage that they should agree upon between a certain percentage and to a different percentage? What's your own view on that?
Okay, let me just engage in some little calculations. If you look at the national minimum wage, we're looking at the minimum wage for probably the poorest states in Nigeria. So let's just take one. I don't want to mention any states. Let's take an example of the poorest state in Nigeria to be state A, where you can survive on X amount. Now let's check out the rents in that state. Let's check out the cost of transport. Let's check out the cost of feeding. Let's check out the cost of healthcare. Let's check out the cost of education. These are basic things that affect life. Ordinarily, there's nowhere in Nigeria today, and I'm saying this categorically with my full chest, where a man will say 1,000 naira is enough for him to feed for one day. I don't think so. So imagine a man, his wife, and 4 children. No. So this man, if it's 1,000 naira a day, the wife feeds 1,000 naira a day, that is 60,000 naira. The 4 children, let's say they feed 500 naira a day, that's 2,000 naira multiplied by 30, that's another 60,000 naira. If you combine that for feeding alone, 120,000, but let's look at the economics of scale and say 50,000 or half of that can feed a family. So let's say 60,000 naira feeds the poorest family in a month. Now look at rents. Rents, the minimum you can get anywhere, the poorest is for reference, it's maybe 5,000 naira. And I don't think you can get that except in the shanties. So let's put it at 10,000. 10,000 added to 60, that's 70,000 naira. So there are other things that you consider: your transport, your health care, the children's education. The minimum, if you ask me realistically, matching up with the realities we have on ground in terms of inflation, should be within the range of 200 to 300,000 naira minimum wage. That's my opinion.
And all right, so, while we're having all of this, back and forth, you've also given your take on what you feel is realistic at this time. There is also the worry, by Nigerians or by experts who say that labor should also be mindful of, the effect that a new minimum wage could have on the economy, and there is the need for the naira to be strengthened and not to further weaken it. Do you share those these concerns? As of course, as we all hope, as you have said, that the talks resume in earnest.
Okay, thank you very much for that. You see, one of the ripple effects of increase in minimum wage is inflation. That's what economics told us, and we've seen it in the past. However, where we are now, inflation is the one that even triggered this conversation. So if the minimum wage is increased, it will further, weaken the naira, create more inflation, probably. It is now the responsibility of the government, through its own economic policies and measures, to find a way of dealing with this, adverse situation. I mean, the inflation. So there are so many economic principles that can be applied. You look at, the impact of forex, even on the lives of an average Nigerian out there. So, but again, let's come back to the part of the government. The government may be in a very serious situation. It's understandable. However, I strongly believe that both sides should work with data. Government should justify their position with data, and the labor should also justify their positions with data, and they have a level of compromise. This negotiation should rather be a win-win negotiation. It shouldn't be a win-lose negotiation or lose-win negotiation or a lose-lose negotiation. It should rather be a win-win. I believe in the long run, the government will shift ground, the people will shift ground. But we can't run away from the fact that inflation will not happen. So whether now or any time in the future, when the minimum wage is increased, we'll still face that. Then we'll be cyclical, we'll overcome it and move to another level.
Okay, so if you are proposing, like you have mentioned earlier, a certain amount of money for a minimum wage, some states might not be able to pay even the 30,000 naira minimum wage. Some states still complained. Do you think other states should be able to pay higher than other states in terms of minimum wage, looking at the IGR and other variables in those states? Do you think different states should be able to determine what they will pay as minimum wage as well?
There should be national minimum wage, which should be minimum across all states.
True.
Across everywhere. Now, the fact of adding to it is not the responsibilities of, each government the way they want it. But let us also be mindful of the fact that we're in a consuming economy. Most of these states that are saying, no, we can't pay. There's no state in Nigeria, quote me anywhere, that does not have the potential to generate revenue, huge revenue that can sustain them without even waiting for allocation. But I'm very sorry to say again, this is national TV. We don't think through how we can make use of our resources to generate revenue. We have huge potentials in all the 36 states of Nigeria, including the FCT. But, what are the things we're really bringing to the table? It's true, some states might not be able to pay, but there should still be a minimum wage. And the question is, why are they not able to pay? go to these states, you see the lawmakers, some people with big vehicles living lavish lives, and the workers are at the extreme end of it. So it's now balancing the interest that really matters, so that we are not creating a system that we burst in our face one day.
And so still on this issue of capacity of states to meet up with the obligations of the new national minimum wage, if and or when it is finally agreed upon by all the parties in this tripartite committee. So would you be advocating monitoring, or what kind of monitoring for compliance would you be advocating for, at least on the part of the states especially?
You see, one thing that we've seen in labor negotiation with the government is that at times governments will agree, then they will go back to do whatever they want to do. We have seen it several times. The strongest mechanism to use here is that labor and the government should have effective date of implementation. Most times they don't reach that date. That's okay, as by 30th of September, all states in Nigeria should comply. The states that refuse to comply, X, Y, Z will happen in that state. It should be very clear. The labor knows what to do in this case. Because most times when these conversations are being held and, everybody goes back to their various jurisdictions, it just becomes business as usual. Labor should set up implementation mechanism, a monitoring and evaluation system to ensure that there is a deadline for effective implementation across the 36 states, and the states that refuse to do that, there should be consequence management for such states. I strongly believe that.
Okay, but then on the flip side is, where the informal sector is concerned. Mr. Jaye, I know you're also an HR expert, but, so there's the informal sector that, has so many, like the majority of Nigeria's workforce, because people are saying that this minimum wage that we are even talking about, how many workers even in the private sector are covered, even though the organized private sector is also represented in the committee. But in terms of, the benefits now to the larger percentage of Nigerians, aren't you worried as to where this is taking us to?
I am worried. I'm worried because our purchasing power, our revenue drive is becoming weaker. And you mentioned the unorganized, segments of the workforce in Nigeria. That is another, issue to deal with on its own. What it comes down to, if we say the minimum wage should be between 200 and 300, I'm also saying my house help should be earning 200 to 300K. But can I afford it is a question that we should ask ourselves. Can I really afford it? Probably no. But there are layers, okay? Layers in the sense that we should look at individuals' capacity to be able to pay. I believe that if a minimum wage is to be instituted, organizations, government should demand more productivity from the workforce. They should demand more from the workforce so that we generate what we are spending. That's the flip side to it. But again, going back, most people, will not be able to afford the 200 to 300,000. But I'm just saying generally that should be the ideal. That should be the ideal. The ideal may be different from reality.
All right, so in all of this now, this issue between Labour and the federal government, what should be done to come to an amicable solution so this can be, we can move forward in every other thing?
Yeah, I think in negotiation, conversation should continue. But like I said, what should be done ideally is for the government to come up with the data, they have. Like, for example, how much does the government even generate? How much does it spend on workforce? What is the government's overhead? What What is the impact of inflation on government spending? What are the challenges in terms of revenue drive for the government and all that? So there should be data on that side. And on the side of labor, labor can also say, okay, the cost of items have gone up by X% and, it's affecting purchasing power by X%. So these are the facts on the table. It should be a situation where first, there should be certain knockups, compromises. And if there are compromises, then it can get to a point where agreement can be reached, theoretically. In this case, if you ask me, I think the government and the labor should consistently have conversation. I discovered there's miscommunication between the two, the parties involved. So I strongly also believe that they should first understand each other or one another, as the case may be. Since it's the tripartite discussion, everybody should understand what they're talking about. But it seems one part seems not to be understanding all the other parts. And I think we should get back to the table to understand ourselves first.
You made a point about productivity, how that, is key. But is that likely to change when a new national minimum wage that works for all parties is attained? Because now we are seeing workers not coming to work as regularly as before. State governments are drafting, devising some form of means to make it easy for everyone. Of course, there are people who are doing some other jobs, side hustle, they call it, just to get by. Is that likely to change for the better? You're talking about productivity now, at least. If we are giving you this much, you should also be able to work as much. What do you think?
Yeah, I believe that if government is giving so much, there should be so much to be delivered. But from the situation we have now, what the governments or governments across the state are doing is cost-saving measures to say, okay, come to work for some days, don't come to work for some days. These are cost-saving measures. And if you look at the template of what operates or what is obtainable in the private sector, it doesn't affect productivity. In fact, perception has shown that most times when people have these hybrid means of working, they may be more productive because they're working in a relaxed environment, at home. Saving costs for the government. However, what I mean by productivity this time around, let's pick a state, for example. If government is increasing minimum wage by X%, how much revenue should government generate to be able to cushion that effect? What are the revenue generating agencies and parastatals? What are the targets to be given to these agencies and parastatals? I think it should change. And of course, the cost management measures should also be put in place in order to reduce unnecessary costs. Cost of governance in Nigeria and in so many states it's crazily high, and I think it's time for various state governments to start looking into all this so that they can balance this, needs and, resources together. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So, if government gives much, then there should be a way of measuring productivity.
Right. And, times are challenging indeed. So what advice will you be giving in your capacity as an expert in the HR field in terms of, advancing with skills? How do you think, or what advice will you be giving to the workers, to workers out there to combat poverty, to, also make themselves more sellable, more productive, at the workplace?
Yeah, what I would say mainly is this is the time that people should be more creative even about their spending. Let's start from there. This is not the time when you just go to the street and spend as usual. So my advice first to the workers is learn how to manage your finances. And in terms of survival instinct, you can also have more means of generating revenue for yourself as an individual. There should be encouragement, even from the government side, of entrepreneurial programs to support, workforce. Let me give you an example, and let me pick Lagos State. You can, train part of the workforce, for example, in Lagos State, to have, entrepreneurial skill that we even align with them to have. That is within the ambit of the law. that will not interfere with your work, And of course, some of them are also doing this, they even know more than us, if you ask me. They know what to do in terms of generating more revenue. But moving forward is for government to encourage entrepreneurial skills and also encourage production. When I mean production now, creating revenue for individuals themselves and also for the states. So my advice is for people to be creative. There is no one answer fits all. Individuals will deal with issues based on their own peculiarities.
And okay, so you spoke earlier on about cost of governance, and amidst all of this is the discussion regarding the implementation of the Steve Oronsaye report. Do you see that? Of course, so many things have happened since Steve Oronsaye-led committee, where they made a number of recommendations in a bid to curb the cost of governance, so to speak. So many agencies having the same roles and all of that. Amidst these talks for a new national minimum wage, where do you see this all going in terms of implementing this very, very interesting report? Especially where the interests of the workers are concerned, job losses, fears of job losses, and the likes.
Okay, thank you very much. You see, Steve Oronsaye's report can be implemented with extremely insignificant loss of jobs. You see, when you have parastatals and agencies doing about the same thing, there are confusions at times, across the divide. All you just need to do is bring them together.
All right,
for them.
All right, Adeyemi Ajayi, I'm afraid we've run out of time now, but thank you very much. Perhaps we will wrap up, in the expectation that we will get to speak with you on this and other pertinent issues. Thank you very much for speaking with us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you very much.
Right, and that's the program today. We thank you very much for watching, and we must also tell you before we go that the views and reactions of all our resource persons and theirs and have no connection with TVC News. From all of us here, thanks for keeping us company, and let's do this again on Friday for the Friday edition of TVC Breakfast. Up next is Your View with the ladies. Have a great day.